Back in the 70s and the 80s, there was something called Kremlinology. And the idea was that, you see, the Soviet Union was so closed off that you needed dedicated people who would sort of like analyze every little detail, every little nugget of information that came out of the Soviet Union to understand what was going on inside the Kremlin. Because, the Kremlin at that time was not, posting statements as to what their intentions were or what they were up to or whatnot, right? And so you needed these Kremlinologists. Actually, it was earlier than the 70s, and there was something similar going on insofar as China was concerned, because they were closed societies. Because the idea was, of course, that in the United States, in the Western democracies, policy was created openly. Well, maybe it used to be, but not anymore, of course, but that's why I'm kind of like laughing. But see, the idea, like I said, was that policy was made out in the open. It was debated in the halls of Congress, and congressmen would get up and argue with one another. And in a democracy, that's how policy issues were resolved, by open debate, open, free debate. And people voted on stuff, and, well, that doesn't happen anymore. Those are the good old days, right? But in the 60s and 70s and 80s, that wasn't happening, of course, in the Soviet Union. It wasn't happening in communist China. Well, it's still communist, but you know what I mean. And so we had these Kremlinologists, right? I remember it very clearly. It was all kinds of fun, actually, because it was like, what does this mean? Does this line in Pravda mean something important? Or maybe it's nothing. Oh my God, maybe they're planning a nuclear weapon, nuclear war. It was like that kind of thing. It was like a soap opera. I remember following it a little bit, when I was a teenager. And then, of course, the end of the Soviet Union. And then, of course, no more Kremlinologists, right? Although they're coming back in vogue. But the ones that we have now are really stupid. But for another video. The point I want to make in this video is that now we need Kremlinologists to study what's going on in Washington. We need people to sort of like a team of experts, Washingtonologists or something, call them that. We need Washingtonologists. And these Washingtonologists, what they have to do is sort of like study what's going on to understand what the regime is up to, what's going on internally. Because, of course, the press that we have, they're garbage. They don't report anything. They just report the superficialities, but they don't report what's actually going on. Not anymore, not for a good long while, right? Why am I bringing this up? Well, because there's this fellow called, the name slips my mind. You guys know how terrible I am with names. It's such a simple name, John R. Allen. It's the simplest name, man. It's John Smith, practically. John R. Allen is a Marine Corps general, retired, who is the head of the Brookings Institute. Now, I did a little research on this John R. Allen fellow. And, he's pretty much the typical Marine Corps general on the left. He got a couple of advanced degrees at Georgetown, the Naval War College. He commanded the American troops in Afghanistan after Petraeus. And he was peripherally and very, very marginally involved in that whole kerfuffle. I mean, nothing really happened. I mean, he wasn't really involved. He was just like a little bit of shit splattered his way, but it didn't affect his career in any meaningful way. And the thing is that starting in 2013, he became a fellow at the Brookings Institute. Now, this is important. The Brookings Institute, for those of you who don't know who aren't American, well, it's a think tank. It is a center of policy development. And it is funded by very highfalutin people in American society and American politics. And it's on the left. The director before John Allen, because he is now currently the director of the Brookings Institute, the director before that was Strobe Talbott, a very, very influential guy. He was actually Bill Clinton's teacher. No, he wasn't a teacher, but he worked for Bill Clinton. It's not important. They were all mixed up. They're all part of this morass. They're all part of the Kremlin in Washington, right? So what's going on is that, John Allen joined the Brookings as a fellow in 2013. And in 2017, he was named the 7th head of the Brookings Institute. There have only been 6 before him. And this is back in 2017. Now, he's in deep and with very good relationships with the people at the Brookings Institute. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, because you see, I want to show you that this is not an internal thing at the Brookings, what's happened. And what's happened is that federal prosecutors have taken possession of John Allen's laptop and his emails and whatnot because they're investigating him for influence peddling and taking money that he shouldn't have from Qatar and all kinds of weirdness in that direction, sort of like some sort of like bribery kind of thing, influence peddling kind of thing, right? But this kind of charge, well, you know, like the saying goes, it's like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. You know, everybody's doing it. So why John Allen of all the people? Because all of the Washingtonian critters are doing something like this, of selling access. I mean, that was Hunter Biden's entire business model, man. I mean, selling influence. But, you know, they're focusing on John Allen, John R. Allen, who's in good with the Brookings Institute. Now, what's the big deal with the Brookings Institute? Well, it's neocon central. And one of the very important figures at the Brookings Institute is Robert Kagan, Victoria Nuland's husband. One of the founders of the very influential right-wing group, the New Progress for the American Century, or New Program for the, whatever it was called, you know, the American exceptionalism bullshit, okay, with Bill Kristol, that whole cabal, right? See, the Brookings is the left-wing think tank, but it is pushing this war in Ukraine, something fierce. And the federal prosecutor and the FBI targeted the head of the Brookings Institute. They haven't fired him. I mean, excuse me, they haven't arrested him yet. And the Brookings Institute, in fact, took him out. They removed him, you know, pending investigation, that kind of thing. But, you know, I mean, they didn't remove him voluntarily, you know. They didn't want to. But, you know, this heat, they wanted to remove him. So what's going on? Well, it seems pretty obvious that there is a faction that really wants to shut down this whole Ukraine thing. A faction in Washington that basically this is a shot across the bow of the neocons. Because remember, Kagan, Robert Kagan, and you say, well, he's just some random think tanker. Who cares about him? Well, he's married to Victoria Nuland. And his brother, Fred, is married to Kimberly Kagan, who runs the ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, which is a prime mover insofar as bullshit Ukraine propaganda. And Fred Kagan, you know, well, he's, you know, into all this shit too. He teaches at West Point and is teaching this bullshit about Ukraine and proxy wars and regime change. I mean, this whole thing is a family business. I've done videos on my other channels about this, right? And so the fact that Allen, John Allen, got taken out at the kneecaps by the FBI and this federal prosecutor, it indicates that there is some other very powerful force in Washington that does not want any more of this Ukraine shit. And the issue is, who is it? Is it the Obama faction? Because it could be them. Because it's not the Clintonista faction. No, of course not. Because Hillary Clinton and all her faction and all the people attached to Hillary. Well, see, Fred Kagan and John Allen and Robert Kagan and Victoria Nuland, they're all part of that cabal. So it's not the Clintonistas who are doing this. Now, could it be the progressives? I doubt it. Because they wouldn't have the sophistication. I mean, well, they would have the sophistication, perhaps some of the smarter people there, but they wouldn't perhaps have the muscle to make it happen. And even if they were able to take out John Allen, well, what would be the point of that for them, from their point of view? Mm-hmm. And so it's not the progressives, and it's certainly not the Biden family, headed by Jill Biden. She doesn't really give a shit. All she cares about is continuing the Biden family grift without anyone in the Biden family being indicted. And John Allen, that his electronic data got seized by the FBI, the American authorities, this does not affect the Biden family at all. I mean, zero. So I'm figuring to be one of these Washingtonologists. I'm figuring that it's the Obama faction shooting, firing around across the bow of the neocons and telling them, enough with this Ukraine shit. We're not going to push it anymore. It's over. I mean, you see my thinking here. Because the Clintonistas, the John McCain faction, when John McCain is no longer alive, but his ghost lingers on, as they say. Hillary Clinton, the Clintonista faction, the McCain faction, the neocon Israel First faction, all these people, the Brookings Institute is their clubhouse. And John Allen was in good standing in this clubhouse. He hadn't, he's not the kind of guy who makes waves. I mean, no guy who makes general ever made waves. Okay? You got to understand that. Both of my grandfathers were naval officers, and I have a bunch of family members who were in the military. No, they were not part of the Pinochet dictatorship, although many of them were the bosses of some of the people who were in the Pinochet junta, but that's for another video. But anyway, I know enough about how it is that people who rise to admiral or general, they're very politically careful. And so John Allen would never have done anything, he'd never have colored outside the lines. And he certainly would not have antagonized his own people, his own clubhouse, for them to remove him. The fact that they removed him is really just damage control. It's not, personal, it's business, right? It's that they figured, well, we'll just take him out of the picture for the time being, just until we figure out what's what. Maybe he's the sacrificial lamb, for these neocons. But clearly, it seems to me, it's the Obama faction telling the Clintonista, warmongering, McCain, Israel First, neocon faction, enough with Ukraine. That's what it seems like. Now, we're going to have to see if this develops into some sort of conflict between the Clintonista neocons and the Obama faction, or if this is sort of like enough of a warning that they kind of like back off. It could be that they back off because they see the cards insofar as Ukraine's losing. Mm-hmm. And so we'll just have to wait and see. But this trivial incident of a retired general's computer being seized by the American government, trivial as though it is indicative of fault lines going on inside the power structure in Washington. We all have to become Washingtonologists. Understand what's going on.